we did, and then later we'll do the letters itself. Alright, so let's go to part A, letter writing. So part 1 of part A is the 2 types of letters you will need to write in your life. So the 2 types of letters are formal and informal. So as the name suggests, informal letters are written to friends and family who you are close with, who you can speak to directly without the need of formality. So that's informal. It has a literal meaning. And formal letters are written to business associates, teachers, colleges, schools, officials, to your boss, to anyone who's not your friend or relative, to your subordinates. Anyone who's not your friend or relative, you have to write a formal letter. There is no chance of writing an informal letter to any of these parties that we just mentioned. Alright, so let's move on to part 2. So we did the basics, now just let's revise it. So the simple basics of how to write a letter on a PC or a tablet or a laptop or whatever you happen to be using. So you will always need an Office suite. So you know what's an Office suite? An Office suite is a software that allows you to view and edit different types of documents, spreadsheets, Word, Excel, all that stuff, numbers, Google Docs and all that stuff. They're all different types of documents, and they've got an Office suite. Alright, so make sure your page layout is set correctly. After you open your Office suite, start a new document to write a letter, and make sure your page layout is set out correctly. That's very important if you have to print it out. Sometimes you have to print out these letters and send them. You cannot send an email all the time because the law or the rules require you to send them by post, so you have to print them out. So always make sure your page layout is set correctly. What's the meaning of page layout? So your page size, it's usually A4 because that's the most common paper sizing used in printers these days. But if you have letter size paper with you, then you select letter or whatever size. If you don't have these two, if you're using some special size, then you select that one. So then then you set up your margins and all that stuff we saw how to do, and all that stuff. So that's not very difficult. And make sure your orientation is in portrait. No, never type a letter in landscape, always in portrait. Alright, so let's go on to landscape and portrait. So you know what landscape is and you know what portrait is because you see it on your phone all the time. So but how did these things come about? How did they come about? So they came about by the way of artists, painters, and the way they painted or drew. So that's how these orientations came about. Alright. Vocabulary and sentence construction. Alright, what's a portrait? Portrait is a noun. A painting, drawing, or photograph of a person's head and shoulders, especially the person's head and shoulders, is a portrait. Self-portrait. A painting, drawing, or photograph of your own head and shoulders, that is of yourself, that you do yourself, that you make yourself, that you click yourself using a phone these days. Alright, so those are portraits. And a person who draws portraits or who makes portraits is a portraitist. Right, so that's a noun. Alright, so Mona Lisa, we saw the movie the other day on Sunday, and that fellow was painting Mona Lisa. So that's a portrait. Okay, landscape. What's the meaning of landscape? It literally means the scape of the land or escape of some land. That's the meaning of landscape, literal meaning of landscape. So everything you can see when you look across a large piece of land, especially in the countryside, a painting or view of the open lands in the countryside, that's a landscape noun, landscape verb. Improve or beautify. Make something beautiful. Improve or beautify the appearance of an area of land. It can be a large countryside, it can be a farm, it can be a garden, anything. That's landscape verb. And landscaping noun, the process of improving or beautifying an area of land, that's landscaping noun. So let's see some examples. So we have landscape gardener, landscape gardening, architect, landscape architecture. So these are all things and people. Landscape gardener is a person. Gardening is a thing, it's an activity, it's a concept, it's a process. Same way of architecture, it's a study, it's an art, it's a form. Improving the landscapes and beautifying them. Alright, so many people love the landscaped countryside of England. That's so true. So that we saw the other day, we saw some pictures and photographs of the countrysides of England, and most of them were beautifully landscaped. So many people love the landscaped countryside of England. I would love to become a landscape architect when I grow up and landscape the countrysides of my country or in my country. At the moment they look like piles of rubbish. Alright, so they are not landscaped, but we need to put some better words, and we'll see some better words. This is a very informal way of saying that. Do not use they look like piles of rubbish in a formal conversation or in a formal letter. Alright, so let's go on to some grammar. So let's do some revision which we have done before. Alright, number 1, the family grew their own food and keep animals. That's not correct. Kept animals. Why is it not correct? See, the sentence is in the past tense. How do you know the sentence is in the past tense? The first verb is in the past tense. The family grew. That's the most important verb of any sentence. Past tense. You cannot jump suddenly from past to the present. So the family grew their own food and kept animals. That's absolutely correct. Alright, number 2. The journey at the mountains was long and difficult. No, doesn't make any sense. You cannot be at the mountains, first of all. The mountains. So mountains are huge. It's a mountain range. We saw what a mountain range looks like, and you cannot be at the mountain range. It's like a city. It's bigger than a city, in fact. So it's impossible to be at a mountain range. So the journey through, you pass through them like a tunnel because you are so small and the mountains are so huge, they're so big, they're so tall. In front of these mountains you are a tiny dot like an ant. So you pass through these mountains. So the journey through the mountains was long and difficult. So we saw that the other day, how you pass through. Alright, and so there was a question, do some people pass through? Yeah, some people do pass through. They do it for a living. They climb mountains for a living, and some people climb it as a leisure, or they go through them, they hike through them. Alright, so now this day she makes hats and socks. Each day. Now each day she makes hats and socks. Simple present. You cannot be this day she makes hats and socks. How about the other days? Then what does she do then? Right, so if you use this day, it doesn't make any sense because it does not validate the rest of the sentence. Makes, that's the most important clue. That's the full entire sentence depends on that. It's the verb, that's simple. So, has to be each day. Number 4, but she ever hopes to return. She ever hopes to return to her farms in the hills one day. She still hopes, not ever hopes. If you put ever, it doesn't really make any sense in the sentence. She still hopes. Alright, number 5. How long have you stayed? For the last 3 weeks. That's right. Total time. We are asking the total time. For how long? How long have you stayed? For the last 3 weeks or for the past 3 weeks, whatever is the correct option. Choose the correct option. Choose the best option. So we saw these tests, they had 3 or 4 different options, so choose the best one. Number 6, how long are you going to stay? Total time. How long is total time? So we saw last week when you said the total time, you have to use for. You cannot use since. So going to stay. How long? Total time. Going to stay, intention. What's your intention? What's your plan? So for another 3 weeks. I'm going to stay for another 3 weeks. I plan to stay for another 3 weeks. I intend to stay for another 3 weeks. Total time. And now let's go to the last part of today's notes. That's changing the forms of sentences. So we'll do one sentence that we did before. Many people love the landscaped countryside of England. how do you change the form? The landscaped countryside of England is loved by many people. That's perfectly correct. Let's take the same sentence and change the. So countryside, make it more than one. Countryside, and here we go, countrysides. So many people love the landscaped countrysides of England. So how do you change this one now? Very simple. You have to just be aware of the verb, which verb you are using. So the landscaped countrysides of England are, they are. It is, they are. Or this is, and these are loved by many people. So that's all for today's notes, and we will do the letters today. The informal letters, we did one yesterday, but we'll just do it again, and then we'll make some notes about that. So write your notes down, revise, watch the other batches videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye, adios.